The Supreme Court has dramatically reshaped American gun rights, issuing a decision that reverberates across the nation. In a historic move, the court struck down a major type of state-level gun control, sending shockwaves through both legal and political communities. This ruling expands the right to carry firearms in public for self-defense, fundamentally altering the landscape for millions of Americans. For many, this means a new era of personal protection, while for others, it raises concerns about public safety and the presence of more guns in daily life. The 6-3 ruling is the most significant Second Amendment decision in over a decade, directly impacting millions in states with restrictive concealed carry laws. States like New York, California, and others with similar regulations now face immediate pressure to adapt. The decision redefines the balance between public safety and the constitutional right to bear arms, forcing several states to rewrite their laws. Lawmakers are now tasked with crafting new regulations that comply with the court's interpretation, while advocacy groups on both sides prepare for the next phase of the debate. For years, the debate centered on whether the Second Amendment protected individual gun ownership or was tied to militias. This question has shaped American legal and cultural battles for generations, influencing everything from local ordinances to national elections. The 2008 Heller decision affirmed the right to keep a handgun at home for self-defense, but left the issue of carrying firearms in public largely unresolved. That ambiguity has fueled years of legal challenges and uncertainty. Now, in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, the court declares that the right to carry a handgun in public for self-defense is constitutionally protected. This marks a pivotal moment, clarifying the scope of the Second Amendment in modern America. The ruling invalidates May-issue licensing schemes in states like New York and California, where officials could deny permits based on subjective criteria. Instead, states must now adopt shall-issue systems, making it easier for law-abiding citizens to obtain permits. The court's majority argues that the right to carry a firearm in public is a core constitutional protection not subject to the whims of local officials. This principle, they say, is rooted in the nation's history and tradition and cannot be overridden by modern policy preferences. As states scramble to comply, this decision sets the stage for new legal battles and a nationwide shift in how Americans carry firearms. The coming months will see intense debate, legislative action, and likely further challenges as the country adapts to this landmark shift in gun rights. The fight over public carry laws stretches back to the nation's founding, when the right to bear arms was first enshrined in the Second Amendment. From the earliest days of the Republic, Americans have debated not just who could own firearms, but where and how they could carry them in public spaces. Over the centuries, states crafted their own patchwork of regulations, reflecting local values, fears, and priorities. Some regions prioritized individual liberty, while others focused on public order and safety, leading to a wide variety of laws across the country. In the 20th century, some states adopted shall-issue systems, which required authorities to grant permits to anyone who met clear, objective criteria, such as passing a background check or completing training. This approach aimed to make the process fair and predictable for law-abiding citizens. Others, like New York, implemented May-issue laws, giving local officials broad discretion to deny permits unless applicants could demonstrate a special need for self-defense. This often resulted in permits being granted only to the well-connected or those in exceptional danger. The Supreme Court's landmark 2008 Heller decision recognized, for the first time, an individual's right to possess firearms for self-defense within the home, striking down a Washington, D.C. handgun ban and reshaping the legal landscape. 2 years later, McDonald v. Chicago extended that right to the states, ensuring that the Second Amendment applied nationwide, not just in federal jurisdictions. Yet, whether this right extended outside the home remained unresolved. This ambiguity led to years of legal uncertainty, as lower courts struggled to interpret the scope of the Second Amendment. To address this, lower courts developed a two-step test, weighing the government's interest in public safety against individual rights. This framework allowed many restrictive laws to survive, even as gun rights advocates pushed for broader protections. The Bruin case began when two New Yorkers, denied unrestricted carry permits for lacking a special need, challenged the system as unconstitutional, arguing that the right to bear arms should not depend on government approval or subjective standards. Their case reached a Supreme Court more conservative than in 2008, with several new justices appointed in recent years. This set the stage for a historic re-evaluation of the Second Amendment's reach and meaning. The court's decision in Bruin would finally answer a question that had lingered for decades. How far does the right to bear arms extend beyond the home, and what limits, if any, can states impose on carrying firearms in public? This ruling marks a turning point in the nation's approach to gun regulation, reshaping the legal landscape and sparking new debates about the balance between individual rights and collective safety. In a landmark decision, Justice Clarence Thomas, writing for the majority of the Supreme Court, established a significant new standard for evaluating gun laws in the United States. According to this new approach, any law regulating firearms must be firmly rooted in the nation's historical tradition of firearm regulation, rather than relying on modern policy arguments or balancing tests. The court decisively rejected the old balancing tests, which weighed public safety against individual rights, and instead declared that the Second Amendment is not a second-class right to be treated differently from other constitutional protections. Now, for any gun regulation to survive judicial scrutiny, the government must demonstrate that the law is consistent with the types of firearm regulations that existed in the late 1700s and 1800s when the Second Amendment was adopted and interpreted. Applying this rigorous historical test, the court struck down New York's proper cause requirement for concealed carry permits, finding no historical precedent for demanding that ordinary citizens prove a special need to carry a firearm for self-defense. However, the majority opinion made clear that the right to carry firearms is not without limits. States still retain the authority to ban guns in sensitive places, such as schools and government buildings, and can require objective licensing standards for carrying firearms in public. But subjective standards that allow officials to arbitrarily deny permits, effectively turning a constitutional right into a privilege granted at the government's discretion, are now unconstitutional under this new framework. The era of may issue permitting, where authorities could deny permits based on personal judgment, is now over. It has been replaced by a history-based approach that demands clear, objective criteria rooted in the nation's legal tradition. This new test will fundamentally shape every future Second Amendment case, setting a precedent that courts across the country must now follow when evaluating the constitutionality of gun regulations. The dissent, led by Justice Breyer, warned that the majority's decision would undermine states' ability to address gun violence. Breyer argued that relying solely on historical tradition ignores modern realities, like urbanization and advanced weaponry, and ties lawmakers' hands. The dissent favored the previous two-part test, which balanced individual rights with public safety and allowed courts to consider real-world evidence. By discarding this approach, Breyer argued, the court risks increasing gun deaths and making it harder for governments to protect citizens. The dissent predicted a wave of legal challenges to other gun safety laws, from magazine limits to red flag laws. In their view, the ruling is a radical shift, with potentially dangerous consequences for public safety. The Bruin decision immediately impacts states like California, New York, and New Jersey, which can no longer require applicants to prove a special need for a concealed carry permit. These states must now adopt shall-issue systems, granting permits to anyone who meets objective criteria. For millions, this means a dramatic expansion of the right to carry firearms in public. Lawmakers are scrambling to rewrite gun laws, exploring ways to regulate who can carry and where, such as expanding the list of sensitive places. States are also considering tougher training requirements and more rigorous background checks. Supporters say this empowers law-abiding citizens, while critics fear more guns in public will lead to more violence. The effects of this legal shift will be closely watched as states adapt to the new standard. In the wake of the ruling, states rushed to revise their gun laws, aiming to comply while retaining some regulatory control. Many focused on expanding sensitive places where guns are banned, like public transit, parks, and large venues. States also toughened objective requirements for permits, adding longer training, social media reviews, and in-person interviews. Lawmakers argue these measures ensure only responsible citizens carry firearms, but gun rights groups are already challenging the new laws in court. They claim that declaring most public spaces sensitive undermines the right to carry. The courts will now have to decide how far states can go in restricting public carry under the Bruin decision. The debate over gun regulation is far from settled. The Bruin decision's impact goes beyond concealed carry, casting doubt on a wide range of gun control laws. The new history-based test is now the standard for evaluating all gun regulations. Legal challenges are mounting against bans on assault weapons, magazine capacity limits, and age restrictions, arguing they lack historical precedent. Even long-standing federal laws are being re-examined through this lens. Judges must now act as historians, comparing modern laws to those from centuries ago. The outcomes of these cases will determine the future of American gun control. The Bruin ruling has triggered a fundamental re-evaluation of the nation's approach to firearms. The ruling has intensified the clash between public safety and individual rights. Supporters see it as a victory for self-defense and individual liberty, arguing that law-abiding citizens should not face arbitrary barriers to carrying firearms. They point to data showing that most permit holders are responsible, and that shall-issue states haven't seen the violence critics predict. Critics warn that more guns in public will lead to more violence, accidents, and fear, especially in crowded urban spaces. They argue that may-issue laws were a vital tool for law enforcement to keep guns out of risky hands. The decision, they say, ignores modern realities and undermines the government's ability to protect the public. The debate over how to balance these values is now more urgent than ever. The Supreme Court's Bruin decision is not the end, but the start of a new era in America's gun debate. It settles the right to carry in public, but opens the door to countless new legal questions. Courts and lawmakers must now define the limits of sensitive places and objective licensing, while challenges to other gun laws work their way through the system. Both sides must adapt. Gun control advocates need historical evidence, while gun rights groups push to dismantle more regulations. The ruling has fundamentally shifted the balance between government regulation and individual rights. The long-term effects on public safety and society remain uncertain. As America enters this new era, the central question persists. How do we balance public safety with a core constitutional right? The answer will shape the nation for years to come.